Hello, and welcome to my video on the myths of learning styles and what to do to combat them. Now, if you've been in education for any amount of time, you've probably seen something like this. A chart detailing the different learning styles that individual students have. It's been thought forever that individual learners each have their own style, a way that we learn best, from visual to auditory to kinesthetic. This supports our ideas that we're individuals, and each one of us has to learn in our own way. Unfortunately, even though we've heard it for years, it turns out it's not true. So what's the problem with learning styles? Well, it turns out that even children who identify which learning style works for them don't really use it. About 70% of the time, kids ignore their preferred learning style. And it turns out it doesn't really matter, because even if they study in their preferred learning style, results on tests and in learning doesn't improve. This may be antithetical to how we usually think about learning. Of course I'm going to learn best visually if I'm a visual learner. Well, turns out we might actually be limiting how we think. We're not learning better because we're visual learners. We're just more comfortable learning visually. And sometimes, to really learn a subject, to really grapple with the ins and outs, you have to step out of your comfort zone. According to the New York Times, it might even be worse than that. Instead of just simply not forcing our students out of their comfort zones once in a while, by allowing them to study only in their preferred learning style, we might be hurting their education. If we limit the methods in which they learn, the different lenses through which they tackle problems and information, we could be hurting their overall education. Turns out that students who are forced to use varied learning styles score better than students who actually practice in their preferred style. Now the question becomes, if individualized learning styles don't work, what does? And on this front, there's some good news. While for years we may have been learning about how we learn the wrong way, some recent studies show there are some things that work across almost all genres. And what are these magical techniques that are going to solve education for you, you might ask? Well, luckily for you, I'm here to tell you. The first is the interruption/incubation technique. The second deals with the theory of varied practice. We'll get into each of these in a little more detail now. The first idea is the idea of interruption, incubation. This deals with the concept that if we work hard enough on a problem, we'll eventually exhaust all our mental resources. We'll get stumped. This happens to the best of us. But how you go about getting around this is the basis for this theory. This theory suggests that the best thing you can do when you're stumped on a problem is simply to stop working on it. This idea of forcing yourself to take breaks in the middle of difficult problems actually has two benefits. One, it allows your subconscious to dredge up information you might not be using at the time or that you hadn't remembered while you were working on the problem in the first place. The second is that it keeps that problem foremost in your mind. It helps build the memory center of your brain around that problem. And it turns out it works for kids of all ages and abilities. Our brains are programmed to work like a checklist. That's why making checklists feels so good. Once an item is checked off, you can forget all about it. Our brains work the same way. If you're learning about a concept and you complete the task at hand, your brain is pre-programmed to forget that. By forcing an interruption, your brain has to focus on that task for longer. It's not off the list, so your brain isn't done thinking about it. Now, the second educational theory we're going to cover today is a lot like candy. Everyone loves candy, but if you were forced to eat candy and only candy, especially the same type of candy, every day for every meal, eventually you'd become sick of it. Our brain works in the same way. That's why the theory of varied practice seems to not only be promising, but a necessary part of effective teaching. What is varied practice, you may ask? Varied, or interleaved practice, is the idea of having students work on several different types of problems to approach a subject, rather than blocked practice, which is having students work on the same type of problem over and over. Think of it as having students both do a long-term project, a public speech, and an essay on a subject, rather than just a book report. Now, those students who just wrote the lengthy book report on the subject may have a decent understanding of the topic. However, the students who are forced to approach that same topic through multiple different learning methods, through multiple different lenses, using different problem-solving techniques, eventually gain a greater understanding of the subject matter as a whole. This is the idea of varied practice. Have your candy after dinner, rather than as dinner. The effects of this varied practice method can be seen in an experiment run in 2007. Two groups of students, one given the blocked practice method, the other given the interleaved or varied practice method, were both tasked with taking the same test. Now, in the run-up to the test, the students who had blocked or focused practice scored better. But on the final test, students who used the varied practice method scored a whopping 43% higher. As a matter of fact, the success of the varied practice method directly contradicts our previously held notions of individualized student learning styles. Turns out, you can't just study one way. Our brains don't work that way, and neither should our school. In the end, the big takeaway from this is we've been going about it all wrong. For many years, we thought there's a certain way that each child learns. In the end, everyone learns in all sorts of different ways. And the best way to go about reinforcing this is to come at it from varied angles, varied practice. And when you get stumped, don't be afraid to take a break. Your brain never does. Thanks for listening. I hope it helped.